Hello, everyone. My name is Ngiste Abebe, and I'm the Director of Public Policy with Columbia Care, and very excited to have with me at Dakeana Jones Bishop with Live Well and the Cannabis Trade Federation's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force, and Christian Sederberg with Vicente Sederberg and Chair of the Cannabis Trade Federation, joining me for a conversation about the DEI platform that the CTF board has voted in and is beginning to implement. So before I dive into some of the discussion, let me hand it off to Dakeana first, if you'd like to introduce yourself and your role and how you came to be involved with the task force.
Hey, hello everyone. I'm Dakeana Jones Bishop. I am the Vice President of Human Resources for Live Well Enlightened Health here in Colorado. I've been there for 3.5 years and I'm loving every moment of it. I've been with the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion for about a year now. Got involved with it with John Lord, who is with CTF, and with Linda. Really kicked this off and am looking so forward to where this is going, mostly with everybody who's gotten involved with it, and had everybody from the DEI come out to Colorado. We hosted that with everybody to come out and really take tours and really understand cannabis and where it's going. So I thought that really kicked everything off with DEI, and I am just looking so forward to where we're going and with everything, with how everything is going with diversity. I thought that was the first step of everybody understanding cannabis. So I was so thrilled that everybody came here to Colorado. So just looking forward to going through this and looking forward to where the task force is going. So thank you for having me.
Thanks. And Christian, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Ngiste. My name is Christian Sederberg. I'm currently the chairman of the board of the Cannabis Trade Federation. My day job is with the law firm Vicente Sederberg. We focus on cannabis issues exclusively. As lawyers, advocates, campaigners, something we passionately care about and working on for a decade. Some of our folks have been working on it for 15, 20 years. So my role with CTF has just been to, support all the work that the DEI task force has done over the past year or so, starting back in May of 2019, and helping with the rollout and making sure that we're putting our money where our mouth is, so to speak, and making sure that we stand up our platform and our accountability tool and other things that we're, really focused on making positive change, something that's been a long time coming, but we're really excited to be a part of it.
Let's start with the DI task force spent over a year or about a year developing some recommendations to make to the board, and the board has voted those in. Dakeana, why don't I hand this off to you? Can you talk about the 2 recommendations that the task force made and why those were the 2 that were sent along to the board?
Well, the recommendations were, what are some of the measurable things that we could recommend that would help different cannabis companies to make sure that they were looking at diversity. So we looked at measurable things. So we looked at a scorecard and what is that going to look like? And so we looked at, are we hiring right? Are we recruiting right? So we just looked at a scorecard and said, what are those components going to look like? So we put that together, and as a group, we had several conference calls. We had several times together where we tweaked it here and there, and what is that going to look like? We also looked at, are we going to look at expungement? Yes, of course. We looked at so many different components so that all the companies could be a part of this and hold them accountable to how they're going to look at that on a daily basis, monthly, quarterly, yearly, and how are they going to continuously look at that so that they feel good every day to say, yes, we understand it, number one, and number two, how are we going to always hold ourselves to a different standard when it comes to diversity. So I do think that through all of our efforts, we definitely came to some conclusions on what that's going to look like. Is it going to take work from everybody? Yes. And I think it's going to evolve every day, every month, every year, and what that's going to look like. And I think that through CTF and their efforts and all the companies, I think that we're going to just get feedback all the time on what it's going to evolve into.
You know, I was really impressed with the recommendations that had come down, and that kind of dual track of the policy platform, which is very externally focused, and making sure that as an industry we're committing to supporting things around expungement, the criminal justice reform, and the very obvious part of I think cannabis policy that's around just like stop the harm that's being done to communities. But then also that policy platform went beyond that to being able to talk about like what does it really mean as an industry to be leaning into supporting diverse ownership in legal and regulatory structures. Right, it's such a young industry and it's really evolving very quickly, and it's really important to have a collective like the Cannabis Trade Federation agree to publicly support those policy pillars, which is great. But we've definitely seen over the course of 2020 particularly, and I do think it's important to note that this task force was established prior to the mass movements that were happening this year, though the recommendations and things came out and are being really acted upon this year. I think it's nice that we've had this conversation started and in this moment of like lots of national focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and what does that mean in so many different places, whether it's our education systems, our personal relationships, but always in the industry or in industry in general and in the economy. And I think sometimes DEI can feel like a buzzword or an acronym to just rattle off, but it really does represent key values. Each word is incredibly meaningful. And this challenge of living up to diversity, equity, and inclusion persists across all sectors of the economy. All we have to do is look at the demographics of the Forbes or the Fortune 500 list. But in cannabis, of course, DEI has a unique urgency because of that contrast between profits for some and prison for others. So maybe I'll hand this off to Christian for a first stab and we can get into it, but I'm curious how we feel like these recommendations and living up to enacting those recommendations will help us respond to the specifics of DEI accountability in the context of the cannabis industry.
Sure, yeah. Well, very well said. A lot of the things you covered. I think it's about specifics and actionable items and ultimately accountability. But as you mentioned, there's a lot of, discussions about these issues, and, people have struggled historically, and, even though they're working on it now, even if they want to do the right thing, or, oftentimes they don't know what the right thing is, they don't have the breadth of experience, say, that the task force brought, right, to say, look, we're going to look at external. We want people externally, external from the organization, to really give us an assessment and, speak truth to us about the areas, some of which we all think about. But a lot of the other things, in that platform, when you talk about, there's a number of issues that we can do a lot better. I like, just even the discussion, which I think I've seen just immediate change, is when people talk about, it's not just about what are your hiring practices and what does your company's overall demographics look like. Do they reflect your community or the communities that you work in? But it's also about supporting other small businesses that support you. Do you, when you're looking at your vendors and other things, are you taking into account their commitments, and again, also, if they haven't made those commitments, we can help lead on them now that we, have become more educated on it. And, so by adding a number of sort of policy goals and sort of what does our organization support writ large, and then creating an accountability tool to say, okay, if this is what we care about writ large, here's how we can say each individual company is doing their part to push forward those policy goals and create success. And I think what you said about the unique nature of this industry, because a lot of people do talk about, well, every industry, it's a problem. It's an American problem, and we're glad we can be doing our part. But, if you look at the Fortune 500 list or others, you don't see much diversity. And, it's not that there's a lot of pushback, but I think that you nailed it when you said that contrast in that there's businesses that are now engaged in large-scale commercial operations, doing something that there's still people going to jail for, in prison for, or that have historically. So there is a unique and incredibly important responsibility for this industry to stand up here and really do the right thing. And again, people say that, but I think what I really like about what we're trying to accomplish is we've created we're creating an actual system so that people can be successful. And frankly, it starts with a tough look in the mirror. How diverse is my organization? What am I not doing right? And, getting people to that point, it's an uncomfortable conversation. But then when you talk to them about, look, if you're not doing that great now, all you can do is improve. And here's the tools to help you do so. And here's how we're going to help get you there. So I think that is how, we do our small part. And hopefully it's something that can really push the conversation forward. And looking forward to having, a bunch of partners on this and continuing to develop with the task force as we move forward and try to find ways to make it better and continue to work on it.
Yeah, I think that piece, especially around the scorecard, like the platform is really helpful for that element of just having that kind of collective force behind, we agree with these basic principles and we're going to commit time, money, effort to living up to those. But the scorecard or the member assessment tool, I have certainly already found really helpful for thinking about our internal strategy and looking at, I know at Columbia Care, we've already been able to start rolling out employee surveys to start being able to better understand where does our diversity strength lie, where are our opportunities for improvement, understanding, these are not unique problems, like we've said, across the entirety of not just the private sector, but I used to work in the civil service, and there was always that drop-off once you reach a certain tier of middle management where the diversity that you saw at other levels of the team was no longer reflected. And it took a lot of leadership commitment to making sure that there was representation as different positions were turned over. And I think the member assessment tool helps folks really focus on things that are not just about the teams that you're hiring and are also along many different measures. It's not just about racial diversity, that also has a specific relevance to cannabis. It's also about disability, sexual identity and gender, and all of those other markers of difference that make a team better and stronger. And I think the member assessment tool is a really helpful resource for companies that are trying to figure out, where do I start? And like, what else do I need to do? Or how do I figure out where I have the most room for improvement and start putting my resources there and understanding how to better show up for not just for my employees, for my customers and my patients and everybody that's impacted by the existence of my business, because it can be a really complicated and sometimes hard to figure out where to start, because DEI threads through everything and is a pretty daunting challenge to really try to live up to and embody those values. Dakeana, you certainly see a lot of that because you work in HR in the cannabis industry. And so I'm curious for you, how you see the member assessment tool really playing out for yourself and others who oversee HR across the industry.
Absolutely. The member assessment tool will help to prioritize because it's a KPI that concentrates on specific and measurable components. That's what I love about it. The goal is to have a starting point, just like you said, for companies for diversity and inclusion, and then it'll become more natural and it'll build into their culture. That's the whole thing. You don't ever want it to be something that you have to enforce into something. You want it to be more natural. It's taking a look back on how it has affected Black and Brown in the war on drugs and what steps can be taken immediately within your company to make a difference. And Being in HR, we looked at, who are you hiring and what communities are you hiring from? And to what you said, we're looking at succession planning. Are you developing women? Are you, looking at people of color in your organization? Here at LiveWell, we look at succession planning. When I first got here, we had one woman in our C-suite. Now we're 60% women. So you have to look at those things. And these are questions that assessment tool will help a company identify with ways of looking at those components that are outlined in that platform. So when, I started here, we looked candidly at diversity, which that's what I loved about it. And it was part of our culture. So identifying where our shortfalls are and knowing how to improve where our assessment tools are created. And then you challenge that. And this is what the assessment tool is going to do. It's going to challenge the companies to step out and make critical changes and expand diversity in your organization at all levels. And that's what I love. So you're going from, your hourly to your C-suite, and what is that going to look like at the end of the day? So what we did with this assessment tool is that we made our own diversity, equity, inclusion within LiveWell. And now we're taking the assessment tool and, building upon that within our company. So, so much is going to come from this. And I think that's what, we're holding ourselves accountable to. How far can we go from this? And I think it just, it's going to be part of a culture change within cannabis as well. And I think that's where, when we look at how much it has affected so many people, and I think that's where people will see the change. I truly do.
So I want to dig into two things that you teed up there, Dakeana. One is your point around DEI can't be like an afterthought. You can't slapdash something like this. It's really got to be baked into the bones of an organization. And, as we look at, TTF is made up of obviously pre-existing and active cannabis companies, but we know there are more out there coming through every day. And we're here at Growth at Home, which is also engaging the investor community among, so many other audiences. And so I guess I'm curious, when we look at this, like, how do we keep making the case? This is great for CTF, but how do we help make sure that other folks are figuring out how to bake DEI into the start and the foundations and the bones of their cannabis enterprises going forward? And I guess, how do you all, maybe the follow on to that is, how do you guys see these resources as they roll out and as we bring them to life over the next year? How do you hope to see this platform change the cannabis industry going forward for both those companies that are yet to come through and the companies that are currently active?
I really think that it's about the dialogue and having those conversations that Christian just talked about, that it might be a little uncomfortable at first, but you have to have the dialogue and you have to continuously talk about it. Our first couple of meetings about diversity, yes, it was uncomfortable. And it was about, what does diversity mean to you? And it meant something totally different to everybody in that room, whether it was about race, whether it was about your gender, whatever it was. But it was about that dialogue, first getting it out there. And it meant something different even to a straight white male. It was that they felt like it was diversity was totally different for them. So, it was, having that dialogue and then creating something, and then it went out to the stores, and then it went out to the grow. And it was just, how is it going to make a difference for the organization? And really, it was the company decided what it was going to look like for the company. And it wasn't us dictating that. It was what everybody around wanted it to look like. So we took it from everyone on what it was going to look like. So that's where we started. So I think that's what, for me, for DEI, is that we're going to have to get that out there to say, we want to help the different companies come along with us and see how we can help to get that dialogue out there.
Yeah, and just adding to that, but very well said. Just back to that point of that uncomfortable initial, and I'm so proud of companies that were, it's not that they were afraid of it, but it's just uncomfortable and everything. This is an incredibly busy time, lots of stuff going on, constant changes. You're, trying to address, but the fact that companies were able just to get comfortable with looking in the mirror, and just, the positive spin is like, well, if you're terrible at it now, that means you've got the most room for improvement, and we're going to use tools to do so. And to their credit, across the board, no one said, I don't want to look in the mirror. I just don't, I don't want to deal with this. They understand how, how important it is. But to sort of to answer your question maybe more directly on, how does this, how do we keep pushing this forward to make sure it's something that this and other things like it are enact true change. I think it's just this fundamental understanding that not only is this the right thing to do, obviously, but it also is very good for your business. Having a baked into the bones approach where you truly value these concepts and these things, it will make you a better company. Consumers are looking for people that are addressing these issues, and in particular cannabis consumers who understand, they're pretty educated, many of them, about the sordid history of, drug policy in this country. And a lot of them see, participating even as a consumer in this industry as something that's making a statement about social change that we're watching in real time. So, for this industry in particular, it's good for business, but just in general, and Fortune 500 companies, all these companies recognize it. It makes you a better company to have a diverse, equitable and inclusive workforce, customer base, et cetera. And so I think if, we just got to keep pushing that too, which is like, this is good for business. This is good for your business. This will be good for the industry as a whole. These are the issues that obviously are front of mind, not just with the American people, but also with their elected officials. And it's come to the forefront with the MORE Act. And, it's only going to be continued conversations about, how this industry looks and how it can both be something that can create jobs, create opportunity for people who historically have been detrimentally impacted, and also just, change the way this country does business in our own way, and set what I believe can be a really good example.
Exactly. And I think what you said was so good is that, when you say inclusive, what does inclusive mean? Who is at that table? And I think that is so powerful, that if you give people a voice and to say who really is at that table and who is inclusive, and you give someone a voice, and to what you said, Kristen, is so many different voices, it is good for business, because, different voices give different points of view, different businesses, so many different things. And I think when you talk about inclusive and you give people different opportunities, it just gives your company a totally different feel. And that's what I've seen when you grow people and succession people, different people into your company. It just gives people so many different opportunities. We just opened in Michigan, and we've given people opportunities that they've never thought that they've had before. And we have a management development program where I've given people and women manager positions, and they're like through the moon, where they've been able to give their ideas about business and things. And they gave us ideas that we said, wow, that's a great way to look at a business thing that we would have probably never thought of. And so it just gives people opportunities that they never thought they could do. So I just think inclusive and making people feel inclusive at a table is huge.
that's a really wonderful story for your Michigan team in particular. And it highlights, I think, I actually had a conversation just yesterday with a friend who works in the nonprofit industry about the diversity of their board. And she summed it really well. It was like, when you don't have a diverse team, you just make worse decisions. And I think that part of remembering that DEI isn't just a buzzword, it's not just something we do to feel good or for PR purposes. It is fundamentally about making a stronger organization. And that's why we pursue these things, because if we're not living up to that in whatever processes, that means we got to fix that process, because we're not optimizing it for the best collective performance we could have. I think the other piece, and this came through really strongly this summer, and I want to give a shout out to the ladies and the team behind Can Inclusive for putting together their accountability list, which I thought was a really, first of all, took a ton of work and was a really important tool for kind of just tracking and collecting all of the cannabis companies out there and how folks were engaging with the movement for Black Lives as it kind of ascended, and the months and months of advocacy that were happening over the summer. And that connects, I think, too, to Christian's point around, like, this is also just good for business. And it led me to continue doing some research and finding out that Black consumers specifically are willing to pay a premium to know that their whatever product they're paying for is in alignment with their values. I've seen other research that indicates for millennials and Gen Z, they're also willing to pay a premium in order to know that their product or the company that's taking their money is in alignment with their broader values. And that's where I think there's the internal side, which is you have a stronger team, you make better decisions, you have better ideas, and can be more innovative, nimble, and flexible internally. But also when it comes to the customer is looking for this. The customer wants to know that they're supporting a company that cares about the same things that they do. And it's not necessarily about being the perfect political match. It's about just saying, like, yeah, we know that collectively as an entire country, we don't do the best job promoting, certain parts of our certain demographics. And we're working real hard to make sure that that's not the case inside of our company. And that we support the right cannabis policies, and that we're here not just trying to secure our bag, but making sure that lots of folks can be a part of this cannabis opportunity going forward. And I think that part is also really important, because this industry is so young. And when folks get worried about first mover advantage or some of those other pieces, I always remind folks that prohibition for alcohol ended over 100 years ago. And the craft brew revolution still managed to happen in the last 10 years. Yeah. And now I can't walk more than a mile in Richmond without running into some sort of brewery that prior to COVID at least was doing quite well for itself. And I think cannabis is certainly, about 100 years behind alcohol when it comes to that journey. And the idea that there's just so much possibility here. And I think one of the key things for bringing a group of companies like the Cannabis Trade Federation to commit to a platform like this DEI platform is that it's not just about making the industry better for our existing companies, but it's about advocating for change that's going to really change the policy landscape for all future cannabis companies, and really setting the tone in the cannabis community and cannabis consumer culture that's around that kind of mindful consumption and intentional consumption, and making sure that we're advocating for all types of change together as companies and with our customers and patients who really need to see it, because we are all saddled by the struggle of federal prohibition, and until we see that gone, it's going to continue to be a slog for any cannabis business that's trying to operate.
Well said.
All right. Well, hey guys, thanks for this awesome chat. Let me just open it up if you have any final comments before we sign off.
Well, I do want to just say that I do feel like the education and mentoring for anybody for diversity, equity, inclusion is huge. I do want to put that out there, that I do feel that that is something that has to be put out there, that we do need to educate and mentor anybody who is trying to get into this industry, because I think that is something that is lacking, that I think that people think that, it's so easy and that they can get into this. And, I sit on a lot of boards for social equity, and they think it's so easy, but if we could get more education and more mentoring out there would be key as well. And if we could package that somewhere into the assessment tool, I would love that as well. That's my one plug.
Look, I mean,
I like that.
Yeah, I look at it. I think, every single company in the cannabis industry, they have a responsibility. Just look at the history, look at everything that's happened. They have a responsibility to be committed to change and to reforms. And you don't have to be a Republican or Democrat or anything like that. I think, for me as a consumer and an industry participant, that is incredibly important to me. And I know it's a lot of people that have just come from traditional businesses have come in, and but that's a part of the culture that they have to understand and frankly embrace is supporting these types of things. So I'm hoping this is that we're doing our small part here, and that we can show some leadership and show it from a place of humility too, because we're not saying by any means any of us are perfect, and we've got a lot of work to do, but we're doing the work, and we're committed to doing it and holding ourselves accountable.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.